"We'll have to take your daughter into long-term placement." The words hit a female nurse like a knife as she stood alone in a hospital hallway, her phone trembling in her hand. 48 hours. That was her punishment for being poor, motherhood taken away due to lack of money. She sank into a chair in the waiting room, unaware that an elderly man, a retired heart surgeon, was quietly watching from across the room with his grandson asleep beside him. Minutes later he stood up, walked over, and said something so unexpected it made the room go silent. What happened next would change their lives in ways no one could have imagined. Before we dive into the full story, tell me where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more stories of kindness every day. The emergency room at St. Anne Public Hospital never slept, but tonight it screamed. Ambulance sirens wailed through the automatic doors every 15 minutes. Somewhere down the hall, a child was crying. A trauma alert echoed over the intercom, calling for doctors who were already buried in patients. Sarah Miller moved through the chaos like she was underwater. Her hands trembled as she reached for another patient chart. The fluorescent lights felt too bright, burning into her skull. She'd worked 6 night shifts in a row because they were short-staffed again, and her body was starting to forget what rest felt like. "Miller, I need those labs from bed 12. A resident brushed past her, not waiting for an answer. Sarah nodded, turning too quickly. The chart slipped from her fingers, papers scattering across the floor like leaves. She dropped to her knees, gathering them with shaking hands. Her vision blurred at the edges. Around her, feet rushed past. Someone stepped on one of the papers. Nobody stopped to help. "Sarah." The charge nurse's voice cut through the noise. Margaret Chen stood over her, arms crossed, her face a mixture of concern and frustration. Other nurses glanced over, then quickly looked away. Nobody wanted to be associated with the nurse who was falling apart. "My office, now." Sarah gathered the last of the papers and followed Margaret down the hall. The small break room felt suffocating. Margaret closed the door and the noise from the ER became muffled, distant. "This is the 3rd mistake this week," Margaret said, her voice low but firm. She didn't sit down. Neither did Sarah. "You're exhausted, you're making errors, you dropped a medication tray yesterday. You charted the wrong vitals on Tuesday, and now this." Sarah's throat tightened. "I understand, it won't happen again. See that it doesn't." Margaret's expression softened slightly, just for a moment. "Sarah, I know you're going through something, but if this continues I'll have to write you up. And if I write you up, administration gets involved. Do you understand what I'm saying?" "Yes." Sarah's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Go home when your shift ends. Actually rest, take a day off if you need to." But Sarah had no home to go to. Not really. The landlord had given her 48 hours to vacate the apartment 3 days ago. She'd been sleeping in her car between shifts, parking in different lots so security wouldn't notice. She washed up in the hospital bathroom, changed clothes in the staff locker room, and tried to look like someone whose life wasn't completely falling apart. She couldn't afford the rent increase. Not on a single income, not with Lily's medical bills still piling up from last year's pneumonia. The insurance had covered most of it, but most wasn't all, and the collection agencies didn't care about most. And Lily wasn't even with her anymore. Sarah returned to the floor, forcing herself to focus. She checked vitals on a man recovering from a stroke. She updated charts for 3 patients waiting for bed assignments upstairs. She adjusted an IV drip for an elderly woman who kept pulling at the line. "Sweetheart, you need to leave that alone," Sarah said gently, repositioning the woman's arm. The woman looked at her with cloudy eyes. "Where's my daughter? She'll be here in the morning. She's always so busy, I don't want to bother her." Sarah's chest tightened. "You're not a bother, she'll want to see you." Near the end of her shift, around 2:30 in the morning, Sarah passed an elderly patient in bed 7. He was recovering from a fall, according to his chart. Stable but being kept for observation. His blanket had slipped off. His water cup sat just out of reach on the bedside table. The call button had fallen to the floor. She should keep moving. She was already behind on her charting. She was already on thin ice with Margaret. But Sarah stopped anyway. She pulled the blanket back over his shoulders. She picked up the call button and clipped it to the bed rail where he could reach it. She filled his water cup and adjusted his pillow so he could breathe easier. His oxygen saturation had been dropping slightly. The pillow position would help. "Thank you, dear," he murmured, half asleep. Sarah managed a small smile before moving on. These small kindnesses were all she had left. Everything else in her life was slipping through her fingers, but she could still do this. She could still help someone. At 3 in the morning, she finally made it to the nurse's break room. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, buzzing like an angry insect. She sat on the worn couch, her body too heavy to hold upright anymore. Her feet ached, her back ached. Everything ached. That's when her phone buzzed. Margaret Collins. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Not her supervisor Margaret Chen. A different Margaret, the caseworker from Child Protective Services. Sarah's hands went numb as she answered. "Hello, Miss Miller. This is Margaret Collins from Child Protective Services. I'm calling about Lily." Sarah's heart stopped. Her first thought was accident, injury, something terrible. "Is she okay? Did something happen?" "She's physically fine, but I need to inform you that we require proof of stable housing within 48 hours. Margaret's voice was professional, detached. She'd made this call 100 times before. "We need a physical address, a lease or ownership document, and verification of a safe living environment. I'm working on it, I just need a little more time. Miss Miller, I understand your situation is difficult, but without stable housing, we cannot approve reunification." The temporary placement was meant to be exactly that. Temporary. It's been 3 weeks. 3 weeks since they'd taken Lily. 3 weeks of supervised visits in a stark office where Lily sat across from her, silent and distant. 3 weeks of Sarah trying to explain to her 7-year-old daughter that this was temporary, that mommy was fixing things, that they'd be together soon. "I'm doing everything I can," Sarah said, hating how desperate she sounded. "I'm working extra shifts, I'm looking for apartments every day." "I know you are, but the reality is we need documentation by Friday at 5 p.m. If we don't receive it, Lily's case will be moved to long-term foster placement proceedings." The words hit Sarah like ice water. Long-term placement, that meant months, maybe years. That meant Lily would stop being a temporary case and become available for adoption by another family. That meant Sarah could lose her daughter forever. "Please," Sarah heard herself whisper. "She's my daughter, she's all I have." "I know, that's why I'm giving you this notice instead of just moving forward with the proceedings. 48 hours, Miss Miller. I need that documentation." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, I really am." The line went dead. Sarah sat frozen, phone still pressed to her ear. The room tilted around her. She couldn't breathe. Her chest felt too tight, like someone had wrapped steel bands around her ribs and was pulling them tighter and tighter. She'd been so careful, so strong, holding everything together with duct tape and willpower, working every shift they'd give her, sleeping in her car, showering at the gym, putting on a smile for Lily during their supervised visits, pretending everything was fine, that mommy was handling it, that they'd be together soon. But it was all falling apart anyway. The apartment she couldn't afford, the shifts that never ended, the exhaustion that was making her make mistakes at work, and now the system that was about to take her child away forever. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears. She couldn't break down here. Not at work, not where people could see. She'd already humiliated herself enough tonight, but her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't make them stop. Her breath came in short gasps. 48 hours. How was she supposed to find an apartment, come up with first and last month's rent, and provide documentation in 48 hours? She couldn't. It was impossible. An impossibility meant losing Lily. Sarah stood on shaking legs and walked to the bathroom. She locked herself in a stall and finally let the tears come. Silent, choking sobs that felt like they were being ripped from her chest. She bit down on her hand to keep from making noise. She was going to lose her daughter. After everything she'd done, everything she'd sacrificed, it wasn't going to be enough. And there was nothing, absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. You're listening to an original story from the official Shiny channel. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Ethan Brooks sat in a plastic chair that was probably older than his grandson, watching the clock tick past 2 in the morning. Noah was curled up beside him, finally asleep after hours of restless fidgeting. The boy's mother was in surgery. Nothing life-threatening, the doctors had assured them, but surgery nonetheless. A routine gallbladder removal that had been postponed twice already. But Noah didn't understand routine. He understood that his mother was being cut open, and 2 years ago his father had gone into the hospital and never come out. Noah had lost his father to a car accident. Sudden, brutal, final. Ever since, the boy had lived with the quiet terror that everyone he loved would disappear the same way. He hadn't said a word since they'd arrived at the hospital 6 hours ago. Ethan understood. He'd learned years ago that sometimes silence was the only response big enough for fear. He was a surgeon once. Cardiac, specializing in valve replacements and bypass procedures. 30 years of cutting people open and putting them back together. He'd retired 5 years ago when his hands started to shake, when Catherine got sick, when the world became too much about endings and not enough about healing. Now he volunteered at St. Anne twice a week, sitting with elderly patients who had no family, reading to them, listening to their stories, holding their hands when they were scared. It helped fill the empty spaces Catherine had left behind. Not enough, but it helped. A nurse rushed past, then stopped, backing up a few steps. She was maybe mid-40s, with dark circles under her eyes and hair falling loose from her ponytail. She stared at the staff directory on the wall like she couldn't quite read it, her hand pressed against the wall to steady herself. Then she turned and walked directly into the women's restroom. Ethan looked away. None of his business. He'd spent enough years in hospitals to know when someone needed privacy. But 10 minutes later she still hadn't come out. And when he shifted in his chair, he could hear something through the door. Not crying exactly, more like someone trying very hard not to cry. The kind of sound people make when they're breaking apart and desperately trying to hold the pieces together. He glanced at Noah, still sleeping. Then he stood and walked to the restroom door, feeling slightly foolish. But he'd seen enough people in crisis to know that sometimes the worst thing you could do was nothing. "Excuse me," he said quietly to the closed door. "Are you all right in there?" A long pause. Then a shaky voice. "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." I'll be out in a minute." "Take your time, I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Another pause. Then the sound of water running. A few moments later the door opened slowly. The nurse stepped out, her eyes red but dry now. She looked at him, startled, like she'd forgotten the world existed outside that bathroom. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to. I'm fine, really." "You're a nurse here?" Ethan asked gently. She nodded. "Sarah Miller, I just finished my shift." She glanced past him toward the emergency room. "I should go." "You probably should," Ethan agreed. "But you also look like you could use a minute to sit down before you drive." Sarah let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Is it that obvious? I used to be a surgeon here. I've seen that look before. Usually on residents after their first bad case." He gestured toward the waiting room. "Come sit down, just for a minute." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. They walked back to the waiting room together. Ethan gestured to a chair near Noah, and Sarah sat, her shoulders sagging like someone had cut all her strings at once. For a moment, neither of them spoke. In the distance, an intercom called for a doctor. A janitor pushed a mop bucket down the hall. "I'm sorry," Sarah said finally. "You don't need to hear about my problems. You're clearly dealing with your own." She looked at Noah. "Is he okay?" "He will be. That's my grandson. His mother's in surgery. Nothing serious, but he lost his father a while back, so hospitals make him anxious." "I'm sorry. Life keeps teaching us how to lose people," Ethan said quietly. "Some lessons are harder than others." Sarah was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I might lose my daughter." Ethan looked at her. She wasn't crying now, but her hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. "Not to death," she continued quickly. "To the system. I lost my apartment. I've been working night shifts to make ends meet, but it's not enough. And now Child Services says I have 48 hours to prove I have stable housing, or they're moving her to long-term foster care." "How old is she?" 7. "Her name is Lily." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "She's been in temporary placement for 3 weeks. She's scared I'm not coming back for her. And if I don't find a place to live by Friday, she'll be right. Ethan said nothing for a moment. He understood bureaucracy, understood the way systems could grind people down in the name of protecting them. When Catherine had died, the insurance company had fought him for months over her final hospital bills. He'd been a doctor for God's sake, and they'd still treated him like he was trying to cheat them. I'm sorry, Sarah said, standing abruptly. I shouldn't have dumped all that on you. You're dealing with your grandson. You don't need my problems too. Wait, Ethan stood as well. Sit down, please. Sarah hesitated, then sat back down. That's when Ethan noticed something. The way she kept glancing at him, her eyes catching on small details. The way he was holding his left arm slightly closer to his chest, the shallow quality of his breathing, the faint tightness around his mouth that meant pain he was trying to ignore. You're in pain, she said suddenly. It's nothing. It's not nothing. She leaned forward slightly. How long have you been sitting here? 6 hours or so. Have you had any water? Have you moved around at all? Ethan paused. I know, Noah needed me to stay close. Sarah stood and walked to the water cooler, filled a paper cup, and brought it back to him. Drink this, and shift your weight to your right side. You're putting too much pressure on your left, and your circulation is being compromised. Ethan took the water, genuinely surprised. You noticed all that? I'm a nurse. It's my job to notice. She watched him drink, her professional eye assessing him. Do you have a heart condition? He paused mid-sip. I do. Then you definitely shouldn't be sitting in these terrible chairs for 6 hours straight. Your circulation needs movement, even just shifting position regularly. Ethan managed a small smile. I was a cardiac surgeon. I know what I'm doing to myself. Sarah's expression shifted, something like understanding crossing her face. You're taking care of your grandson, so you're not taking care of yourself, something like that. They sat in silence for a moment. Two strangers, two people carrying impossible weight, finding an odd comfort in each other's company. Thank you, Ethan said quietly. For the water, for noticing, for caring about an old man you don't know. Sarah nodded, settling back in her chair. Thank you for listening, for not telling me to pull myself together, or that everything happens for a reason. Those are terrible things to say to someone who's suffering. You'd be surprised how many people say them anyway. They sat together in the quiet waiting room, and for just a moment, neither of them felt quite so alone. They moved to a quieter corner of the hospital, around 4 in the morning, the kind of hour when the world felt paused between night and day. Noah had woken up briefly when a nurse came to update them on his mother's surgery, learned she was doing fine, and promptly fell back asleep in his chair. The surgery waiting room had emptied out, except for one other family huddled together at the far end. Sarah sat across from Ethan at a small table near the vending machines, her cold coffee untouched. Ethan had been quiet for several minutes, his expression thoughtful, like he was working through a complex problem. You don't need money, he said finally. Sarah looked up, confused. What? I've been thinking about your situation. You don't need money, not primarily. What you need is an address. You need someone to verify that you have a stable place to live. Ethan met her eyes. I have both of those things. Sarah's stomach tightened. I don't understand what you're saying. I have a house, 3 bedrooms in a neighborhood about 20 minutes from here. It's old and needs some work, but it's clean and safe. There's a spare room that hasn't been used since my wife died 3 years ago. He paused. You and Lily could stay there. Sarah felt like the floor was tilting beneath her. You're offering to let me and my daughter live with you. You don't even know me. I know enough. You know nothing about me. I could be dangerous. I could be lying about everything. I could be a drug addict, or a thief, or, are you? No. But that's not the point. Then what is the point? Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, I'm not naive. I'm not a foolish old man who can't see when he's being manipulated. I'm offering you this because I can see that you're not manipulating anyone. You're just desperate. And desperation doesn't make you dangerous. It makes you human. Sarah shook her head, her throat tight. Why would you do that? Why would you let a stranger into your home? Because I can. Because someone should. because if I were in your position, I'd hope someone would do it for me. You don't owe me anything. You don't even know Lily. This isn't about owing. This isn't about knowing. It's about doing what's right when you have the ability to do it. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Look, I'm not asking you to take care of me. I'm not asking for rent money, or services or anything in return. I'm simply offering you a legal address and a witness statement that you and your daughter are living in a stable, safe environment. That's all the caseworker needs, isn't it? Yes, but nothing. You need a place. I have a place. It's simple. Sarah looked at him. This stranger who was offering her the one thing she desperately needed. It felt too easy, too convenient, like a trap waiting to spring closed around her. I have conditions, she said slowly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're in no position to make conditions, and yet you're making them anyway. I'm listening. If I do this, I won't take money from you. I'll pay rent when I can. Even if it's just a small amount, and I won't just live there like a guest. I'll help around the house. She held up a hand when he started to protest. Not as a servant, not as payment, but as someone who shares a home and contributes to it. Sarah, let me finish. Her voice was steady now, strengthened by the ability to offer something in return. You have a heart condition. I saw how you were sitting, how you're breathing. You're not taking care of yourself, because you're focused on your grandson. If I'm living under your roof, I'll make sure you're eating properly. Not too much salt, balanced meals, nothing heavy before bed that could trigger reflux or put stress on your heart. I'll remind you to take your medication. I'll make sure you're resting when you need to. I don't need a live-in nurse. I'm not offering to be your nurse. I'm offering to be a housemate who happens to notice when you're not taking care of yourself. Sarah's eyes were fierce now. You want to help me, fine, but it goes both ways. You help me keep my daughter, and I help you stay healthy enough to take care of your grandson. Equal exchange. No debt, no charity. Ethan studied her for a long moment, something like respect crossing his face. You're a remarkably stubborn woman. I'm a mother. We don't know how to accept help without giving something back. And if I say no to your conditions, then I say no to your offer. Sarah's voice was firm, despite the desperation clawing at her chest. I won't be a burden to you. I won't be someone you resent. Either we help each other, or we don't do this at all. Ethan was quiet, then slowly smiled. You drive a hard bargain for someone with no leverage. I always have leverage. I have my dignity. Fair enough. He extended his hand across the table. We have a deal. You and Lily can stay as long as you need, and you can make me eat vegetables and take my medicine. Does that satisfy your stubborn need to contribute? Sarah hesitated. Her pride was screaming at her to say no, to walk away, to figure it out on her own like she always had. But her love for Lily was louder, and maybe, just maybe, accepting help didn't make her weak. Maybe it just made her human. She shook his hand. Deal. That's when her phone rang. Sarah's heart plummeted when she saw the name. Margaret Collins. Again. It's the caseworker, she said, her voice tight. Answer it, Ethan said calmly. Sarah pressed the phone to her ear with shaking hands. Hello, Miss Miller. I'm calling with an update on Lily's case. Margaret's voice was brisk, professional, already moving forward with the machinery of the system. I've reviewed your file again this evening, and I need to inform you that due to the extended period without stable housing, we're moving forward with initiating long-term placement proceedings. The paperwork will be filed first thing tomorrow morning. Wait, Sarah's voice broke. You said I had 48 hours. You called me 3 hours ago. That was before I realized how long you've been without a verifiable address. Miss Miller, I understand this is difficult, but we have to prioritize the child's stability. Lily needs permanence, not promises. She needs to know where she's going to sleep next month, next year. Right now, you can't provide that. I have an address. The words tumbled out before Sarah could think them through. I'm moving into a new residence today. Right now, I can provide documentation by this afternoon. A pause. Sarah could hear papers rustling on the other end of the line. You secured housing in the last 3 hours. Yes, Miss Miller, if this is a temporary solution. If you're staying with a friend just to delay the process, it's not temporary. It's a real home with a real address. I can give you the information right now. I can provide a lease agreement and a character reference from the homeowner by end of business today. Another pause, longer this time. What's the address? Sarah looked at Ethan, panic in her eyes. He pulled out his wallet, extracted a card, and handed it to her. His address was printed on it. Sarah read it into the phone, her voice shaking. 217 Oak Street. It's a 3-bedroom house. The homeowner is Ethan Brooks. He's a retired cardiac surgeon. He's offering me and Lily a place to stay. And how long have you known Mr. Brooks? Sarah's mind raced. If she said 3 hours, Margaret would never believe this was legitimate. We met at the hospital. He's a volunteer there. We've known each other for several weeks. It wasn't exactly a lie. They had met at the hospital, just several hours ago, not several weeks. I'll need documentation, Miss Miller, a signed lease or residency agreement, a notarized statement from Mr. Brooks confirming the arrangement, proof that this is a safe, stable environment. You'll have it by 5 p.m. today. I promise. If you don't, or if this falls through, there won't be another extension. Do you understand? I understand. Good. I'll be waiting for that documentation. The line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. She looked at Ethan, her eyes wide with something between hope and terror. I just lied to a caseworker. She whispered. You stretched the truth slightly. There's a difference. But what if she finds out I just met you tonight? What if she thinks I'm exploiting you? They could open an investigation. They could accuse me of elder abuse. They could take Lily away permanently and press charges against me. Sarah, Ethan's voice was calm, grounded. Breathe. She tried. Her lungs felt too small, too tight. I'm 68 years old. Ethan continued. I'm of sound mind. I own my home outright with no mortgage. I'm choosing of my own free will to offer you and your daughter a place to stay. There's nothing illegal or unethical about that. And if anyone questions my judgment, I'll set them straight very clearly. Sarah pressed her hands to her face. This is insane. This whole thing is insane. Maybe, but it's also the only option that keeps your daughter with you. So we make it work. But the documentation, we need a lease agreement, a notarized statement. I know a notary who owes me a favor. We can have the documents drawn up and signed by noon. Ethan pulled out his phone. I'll call him now. Sarah watched him dial, still unable to fully process what was happening. This man she'd known for less than 4 hours was upending his entire life to help her. It didn't make sense. People didn't do this, not in her experience, not without wanting something in return. Why are you really doing this? She asked when he ended the call. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke his voice was soft, distant. When my wife died, I felt like I was drowning. Everyone around me kept moving, kept living their normal lives, and I just stopped. I didn't know how to be a person anymore without her. I didn't know how to get up in the morning, or make coffee or exist in a world where she wasn't. I'm sorry. My grandson needed me, so I had to learn how to keep going. But it was hard, harder than anything I'd ever done, including the most complex surgeries of my career. And there were days when I wished someone, anyone, would just see me, see that I was struggling, offer help without making me beg for it, or admit how badly I was falling apart. Did anyone? No. Ethan met her eyes. So I'm offering it to you, because I know what it feels like to need help and be too proud to ask, because your daughter deserves to have her mother, and because doing nothing, when I have the power to do something, would make me complicit in separating a family. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet. Let's just get through Friday first. Let's get those documents to your caseworker, and get Lily back home with you. Then we'll figure out the rest. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes quickly. Okay, what do we need to do? First we go to my house. You see where you and Lily will be staying. Then we meet with the notary at 9, and get everything signed. Then we deliver the documents to Child Services before 5 p.m. And then we pick up your daughter, and bring her home. Home. The word felt foreign and precious at the same time. Sarah hadn't had a real home in months. Just temporary places, borrowed spaces, the back seat of her car. Okay, she said again, her voice stronger now. Let's do this. This story is produced by the official channel Shiny Stories. Sarah picked up Lily on Thursday afternoon at 3:15. The foster home was a tidy ranch house in a subdivision where all the lawns looked the same. Clean, safe, temporary. The kind of place designed to look cheerful while children waited for their real lives to start again. Lily sat on the front steps with her backpack, looking impossibly small. She wore the same pink jacket Sarah had bought her last fall, now too short in the sleeves. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that someone else had done. Her eyes were fixed on the ground. When she saw Sarah's car pull up, she didn't run. She didn't smile. She just stood up slowly, like she was afraid sudden movement might make her mother disappear. "Hi, baby," Sarah said, kneeling down on the sidewalk with her arms open. Lily walked into them, but her body was stiff, uncertain. She held on, but not the way she used to. Not like Sarah was her whole world. More like Sarah was something that might vanish at any moment. "We're going home," Sarah whispered into her daughter's hair. "I promise, we're going home." Lily didn't answer. The foster mother, Mrs. Chen, came to the door with Lily's small suitcase. She was kind, in her 50s, the type of person who dedicated her life to caring for children in transition. "She's been very quiet," Mrs. Chen said gently, "but she's a sweet girl. I hope everything works out for you both. Thank you for taking care of her." Of course, Mrs. Chen handed Sarah a folder. "Here's her school records and medical information. She hasn't had any issues, just she's been withdrawn." Sarah took the folder, her throat tight. "I'll take care of her now." They drove to Ethan's house in silence. Lily stared out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sarah wanted to explain everything. Wanted to promise her that this time it would be different, that they were safe now, that no one was going to take her away again. But the words felt hollow. She'd made promises before, promises about the apartment they'd lost, promises that everything would be okay, and every promise had turned to dust. So instead she just drove, stealing glances at her daughter's small profile, and hoped that actions would speak louder than all her broken words. Ethan's house was a small 2-story on Oak Street, in a neighborhood where the trees were old enough to arch over the road, and the houses had clearly seen better days. The paint on Ethan's house was faded to a pale yellow. The porch sagged slightly on one side, but the lawn was neatly mowed, the windows were clean, and there were flower boxes under the windows, empty now in late autumn but well maintained. It looked like a home, a real home where people lived. Ethan opened the door before they reached it. Noah stood behind him, watching them with dark, cautious eyes. The boy was maybe 10 or 11, tall for his age, with the same careful stillness that Lily had. The stillness of children who'd learned that the world could change without warning. "Sarah, Lily," Ethan said warmly. "Welcome, come in." The inside of the house smelled like old wood, and something baking. Cookies, Sarah realized. Ethan had baked cookies. The furniture was dated but comfortable. A worn couch, a coffee table with water rings, a bookshelf overflowing with medical texts and novels. Family photos covered the mantel, pictures of a younger Ethan with a woman who must have been Catherine. Her smile was bright in every photo. "This is Noah," Ethan said, putting a hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Noah, this is Lily." Neither child spoke, they just looked at each other. Two strangers thrust together by adult decisions, sizing up this new reality. "The room upstairs is ready for you," Ethan said to Sarah. "Noah helped me clear it out this morning. Fresh sheets, clean towels in the bathroom." "Thank you," Sarah managed. "We really appreciate." "No need to thank me. This is your home now." He looked at Lily. "Are you hungry? I made cookies. They're probably terrible because I don't bake very often, but they're edible." Lily shook her head, still not speaking. That's okay, they'll be here when you're ready. Sarah and Lily climbed the stairs. The bedroom was small but clean, with a double bed covered in a faded quilt, a dresser with a mirror, and a window overlooking the backyard. Someone had put fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser. The room smelled faintly of lavender. Lily set her backpack down carefully, like it might break. She looked around the room, her expression unreadable. "Is this really ours?" she asked quietly. The first word she'd spoken since Sarah picked her up. Sarah knelt beside her. "Yes, baby, for as long as we need it. But it's not our house, it's that man's house. His name is Mr. Brooks, and you're right, it's his house. But he's letting us stay here. He's being very kind to us." Why? It was such a simple question, but Sarah had no simple answer. Because he's a good person. Because he wants to help. Lily looked at her mother with those two old eyes, eyes that had seen too much instability, too many promises that fell apart. "When do we have to leave?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. "I don't know yet, but not today, not tomorrow. We're safe here, Lily, I promise you're safe." Lily nodded, but her expression didn't change. She'd heard promises before. That evening, Ethan made dinner. Sarah tried to help, but he waved her off with a gentle insistence. "You've been working all night, you need to rest." But Sarah couldn't rest. Her body was too used to constant motion, too conditioned to stay one step ahead of disaster. So she stood in the kitchen doorway anyway, watching him cook. "You're using too much salt," she observed as he seasoned the chicken. Ethan looked at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "I like salt. You have a heart condition. Too much sodium increases blood pressure, and puts strain on your cardiovascular system. You need to cut back significantly." "Sarah, I'm not trying to boss you around. I'm just," she paused, searching for the right words. "I'm keeping my end of our deal. Remember, you help me, I help you." Ethan studied her for a moment, then handed her the salt shaker with a slight smile. "Fine, you season it then. Show me how a cardiac nurse does it." Sarah took the shaker and used about a quarter of what he'd been planning. She added other spices instead, herbs and garlic powder, making the food flavorful without the sodium. They ate together at the small kitchen table, 4 people who didn't quite fit, trying to figure out how to share space. Noah and Lily sat across from each other, silent, pushing food around their plates. The adults made occasional comments about the food, the weather, anything to fill the heavy silence. Then Ethan set down his fork and looked at everyone. "I think we need some house rules." Everyone looked at him. "First rule, nobody gets interrogated here. If you don't want to talk about something, you don't have to. Your silence will be respected." Lily glanced up, interested despite herself. "Second rule, respect each other's space. We all need places we can go to be alone when we need to be." Noah nodded slightly. "Third rule, if you're scared or worried about something, you can say it out loud, or you can stay quiet. Both are perfectly okay. There's no wrong way to feel in this house." Lily set down her fork. "What if I don't want to talk ever?" "Then you don't have to," Ethan said simply. "Not until you're ready, maybe not even then. That's up to you." Noah spoke for the first time since they'd arrived, his voice quiet but clear. "Do we have to pretend to be happy?" "Absolutely not," Ethan said. "You can be sad, you can be angry, you can be scared or confused or any other thing you're actually feeling. The only thing I ask is that you be honest. You don't have to share that honesty with anyone else, but at least be honest with yourself." The children absorbed this. Something like relief crossed both their faces, like they'd been given permission to stop performing. After dinner, Sarah helped clean up. She noticed Ethan moving more slowly than before, one hand pressed briefly to his chest when he thought no one was looking. The day had been long for him. The stress of the notary, the documentation, the sudden addition of 2 people to his household. "Sit down," she said quietly. "I'm fine. You're not. Your breathing is shallow and you're favoring your left side. Sit down before you fall down." He sat too tired to argue. Sarah finished the dishes, then made tea. Not because he'd asked for it, but because she knew what he needed, something warm and calming, something to slow his heart rate and ease the tension she could see in his shoulders. "You don't have to take care of me," Ethan said when she set the cup in front of him. "I'm not taking care of you, I'm making tea for someone who lives in this house. It happens to be you, you know what I mean." Sarah sat across from him. "Yes I do, and yes I do have to. Not because I'm obligated but because I want to. You gave me my daughter back. The absolute least I can do is make sure you don't have a heart attack in your own kitchen." Ethan smiled despite himself. "When you put it that way." Over the next few days a rhythm formed. Sarah worked her night shifts, came home exhausted, slept for a few hours, then spent the afternoons with Lily. Ethan took Noah to school in the mornings, volunteered at the hospital twice a week and came home to find Sarah already preparing dinner. Always low sodium, always balanced, nothing heavy or fried or likely to cause digestive stress that could trigger his heart condition. "You're a tyrant about food," he commented one evening, looking at the grilled chicken and steamed vegetables. "You're welcome," Sarah replied without missing a beat, but it wasn't just about food. Sarah noticed things. She noticed when Ethan looked more tired than usual and gently suggested he skip his volunteer shift that day. She noticed when he seemed restless and encouraged him to tell Noah stories about his surgeries, about the lives he'd saved, about the incredible things the human heart could survive. She noticed when the house felt too quiet and turned on music, something soft and classical that filled the empty spaces without demanding attention. And slowly, gradually, the house stopped feeling empty. Noah and Lily began to thaw around each other. They didn't become instant friends. They didn't talk much, but they started to exist in the same space without fear. They did homework at the kitchen table together, not helping each other but not entirely separate either. They watched television in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, sharing the space. One night, about a week after Lily arrived, Sarah heard voices from the living room. She paused in the kitchen, listening. "Do you think they'll make us leave?" Lily's voice, small and uncertain, a long pause, then Noah, "I don't know. Grown-ups make decisions we can't control. I'm scared." "Me too. Do you think they want us here, or are they just being nice because they have to?" Another pause. "I think my grandpa wants us here. He seems less sad than before. My mom seems less tired, not all the way better but better." Yeah, it wasn't friendship yet, but it was acknowledgement. Two children who understood what it meant to lose everything, finding some small comfort in the fact that someone else understood too. Sarah stood in the kitchen doorway, her heart aching. This house, this temporary arrangement, was becoming something real, something safe, and that terrified her more than anything, because safe things could be taken away. She'd learned that the hard way. Ethan came up beside her, having heard the same conversation. "They're good kids." "They are. You're a good mother, Sarah." Her throat tightened. "I'm trying. I feel like I'm just barely holding it together." "That's all any of us can do, hold it together as best we can." She looked at him. "You didn't have to do any of this." "Yes, I did." Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. "Because the world needs more people who help when they can. Not for reward, not for recognition, not because they'll get something out of it, just because it's the right thing to do." Sarah wanted to believe him, but she'd learned the hard way that kindness usually came with a price, that nothing in life was truly free. "Thank you," she said quietly, because she didn't know what else to say. "For everything." Ethan just nodded, his eyes on the two children who were slowly learning that maybe, just maybe, this place might be safe enough to let their guard down. You're listening to an original story from the official Shiny Stories channel. Margaret Collins arrived at 9 o'clock sharp on Friday morning, exactly 1 week after Sarah and Lily had moved in. She drove a sensible sedan and carried a leather portfolio that suggested she'd done this evaluation hundreds of times before. Sarah's stomach twisted into knots as she opened the door. "Miss Miller," Margaret said crisply, offering a professional handshake. Her grip was firm. "Assessing. May I come in?" "Of course, please." Ethan was waiting in the living room, dressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, his posture straight despite the exhaustion Sarah could see in the tightness around his eyes. He'd been up late the night before, making sure everything in the house looked settled, lived in, genuinely stable rather than hastily arranged. "Mr. Brooks," Margaret said, shaking his hand as well. "Thank you for agreeing to this home visit. I appreciate your cooperation. Of course, we want to make sure you have everything you need to feel confident about Lily's placement here." Ethan gestured to the couch. Please, have a seat. Can I get you some coffee or tea? No thank you. I'd like to get started if that's all right. Margaret sat, but she didn't relax. She opened her portfolio, pen poised over a checklist. I'll be direct, as I'm sure you both appreciate honesty. This living arrangement came together very quickly. That raises some concerns about whether it's a genuine sustainable solution or simply a tactical response to circumvent the system's requirements. I understand your concern, Ethan said calmly, settling into his armchair. But I assure you this is a legitimate arrangement. Sarah and Lily are not here temporarily to satisfy a bureaucratic requirement. They're here because they needed help and I was able to provide it. Margaret made a note. How long have you known Miss Miller? We met at St. Anne Hospital about 2 weeks ago. I volunteer there regularly. 2 weeks, Sarah had coached him on this timeline. Long enough to seem deliberate, short enough to still be honest about it being recent. And in those 2 weeks you decided to offer her and her daughter a place to live in your home. Yes. Can you explain your reasoning? Margaret's tone wasn't hostile, just professionally skeptical. Most people don't make that kind of offer to someone they barely know. Most people haven't been where I've been. Ethan said quietly. My wife died 3 years ago. I know what it feels like to need help and not know where to find it. I know what it feels like to watch systems fail people who are trying their best. When I realized Sarah's situation, I had the means to help, so I did. And you're aware that you're taking on significant responsibility. You're providing housing for a single mother and her child with no legal obligation, no financial compensation, no guarantee of how long this arrangement will last. I'm aware, and I'm comfortable with it. Margaret turned to Sarah. Miss Miller, how long do you plan to live here? Sarah's mouth went dry, but she kept her voice steady. As long as Mr. Brooks is willing to have us, and until I can secure permanent housing of my own. I've been approved for a hospital-subsidized housing program that should have an opening within the next 2 to 3 months. And what happens if that falls through? If the housing program doesn't work out, or if Mr. Brooks changes his mind about this arrangement, then I'll find another solution. But right now this is where Lily and I are living. This is our home, and it's stable. Margaret looked around the living room, taking in every detail. The family photos on the mantel, the lived-in quality of the furniture, a child's drawing on the refrigerator that Sarah could see through the kitchen doorway, something Lily had made at school. Small signs that this wasn't a performance, that people actually lived here. May I see the bedroom where you and Lily sleep? Of course. Sarah stood, her heart hammering. It's upstairs. Margaret followed her up. The room Sarah shared with Lily was small but organized. Lily's clothes were folded in the dresser drawers. Her books were arranged on the small shelf Ethan had installed on the wall. Her backpack hung on a hook by the door. Her favorite stuffed animal, a worn rabbit named Mr. Ears, sat on the pillow. Margaret examined everything with a critical eye, opening drawers, checking the closet, looking for inconsistencies. Where does Lily sleep when you're working night shifts? Here in this bed. Mr. Brooks is downstairs if she needs anything. And we also have a neighbor, Miss Patterson, who checks in during the evenings when Mr. Brooks is at his volunteer shift at the hospital. So Mr. Brooks is responsible for supervising your daughter while you work. Sarah's stomach dropped. That sounded bad. That sounded like she was using an elderly man as free childcare, taking advantage of his kindness. But Ethan appeared in the doorway before she could formulate an answer. I wouldn't characterize it as supervision exactly. Noah and Lily are typically asleep by the time Sarah leaves for her shift at 10 p.m. I'm simply here in case of emergency, which hasn't occurred yet. Sarah has also arranged for Mrs. Patterson next door to be available if anything comes up during the hours I'm volunteering. Margaret turned to face him. You volunteer at St. Anne Hospital. Twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I visit with elderly patients who don't have family nearby. And what did you do before you retired, Mr. Brooks? I was a cardiac surgeon at St. Anne for 30 years. Something shifted in Margaret's expression, a flicker of recognition or respect. You were a surgeon there? Yes, I retired 5 years ago. Margaret made more notes on her clipboard. Then she set it down and looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Brooks, I need to ask you some difficult questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Are you being coerced or manipulated in any way to provide this housing arrangement? Ethan's face hardened. Absolutely not. Are you receiving any financial compensation or other benefits from this arrangement? No. Has Miss Miller pressured you, suggested that you owe her anything, or made you feel obligated to help her in any way? Collins, Ethan said, and his voice had an edge now, the authority of someone who'd spent decades making life and death decisions. I'm 68 years old. I've performed over 2,000 heart surgeries in my career. I've raised my grandson on my own for the past 2 years since his father died. I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions without being manipulated by a woman half my age who works night shifts at a hospital and barely has time to sleep, let alone scheme. Margaret didn't flinch. I appreciate your confidence in your own judgment, Mr. Brooks, but I have to ask these questions. Elder abuse and exploitation are serious concerns, and they often involve well-meaning individuals who don't realize they're being taken advantage of. This isn't elder abuse. This is me choosing to help someone who needs it. There's a significant difference, but you barely know her. You met 2 weeks ago. I know enough. I know she's a dedicated mother who's working herself to exhaustion to provide for her daughter. I know she lost her housing through no fault of her own. I know the system was about to separate her from her child permanently, and I know I have an empty room in a house that's been too quiet since my wife died. Those facts are sufficient for me to make this decision. Margaret studied him for a long moment, then she turned to Sarah. Miss Miller, would you mind stepping outside for a few minutes? I need to speak with Mr. Brooks privately. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. What? Why? It's standard procedure for these evaluations. I need to ensure that Mr. Brooks feels comfortable speaking freely without any perceived pressure from your presence. But it's all right, Sarah, Ethan said calmly. Go ahead, I'll be fine. Sarah left the room on shaking legs. She stood in the hallway, her back against the wall, listening to the murmur of voices inside but unable to make out words. This was it. Margaret was going to decide that Ethan wasn't competent to make this decision. She was going to open an investigation into elder abuse. She was going to take Lily away and possibly press charges against Sarah for exploitation. The door opened. Margaret emerged, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Brooks, she said, her voice carrying into the hallway so Sarah could hear. I'm going to ask you a series of questions to assess your understanding of this situation and your decision-making capacity. These are standard questions. Please answer them to the best of your ability. Sarah's blood ran cold. A capacity assessment. They were testing whether Ethan was mentally competent. What is today's date? Margaret asked. Friday, November 17, 2023. Ethan's voice was patient, steady. Who is the current president of the United States? He answered. Margaret continued with more questions. What year did you retire? Can you tell me your address? What medications are you currently taking? Basic cognitive assessments designed to determine if he was being taken advantage of, if he was too impaired to understand what he was agreeing to. Sarah wanted to scream. This man had been a surgeon, for God's sake. He'd held human hearts in his hands. He didn't need to be tested like a child to prove he could make his own decisions. But Ethan answered every question calmly, patiently, like he understood that Margaret was just doing her job, that she had to protect vulnerable adults the same way she protected vulnerable children. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Margaret asked her final questions. Mr. Brooks, do you understand that you have the legal right to ask Miss Miller and her daughter to leave your home at any time, for any reason? I do understand that. And do you understand that you are not legally obligated to provide for them in any way? Not financially, not materially, not in any capacity. I understand completely. Then can you explain to me, in your own words, why you're doing this? Ethan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but clear enough for Sarah to hear from the hallway. Because I was in foster care myself as a child, Miss Collins. Sarah's breath caught. Ethan had never mentioned this to her, never said a word about his own childhood. My parents died in a car accident when I was 9 years old. Ethan continued. I had no other family. I went into the system. I was moved from home to home. 3 different placements in 2 years. Nobody wanted to keep me long term. I was quiet, grieving, difficult in the way that traumatized children are difficult. Margaret was silent, listening. Then I was placed with the Thompsons, George and Ellen Thompson. They were in their 50s, couldn't have children of their own. and they had absolutely no obligation to take in a broken 9-year-old boy. But they did anyway. They gave me a home, they paid for my education, they loved me like I was their own son. They asked for nothing in return. Sarah's eyes burned with tears she couldn't let fall. Without them I wouldn't have finished high school, let alone medical school. I wouldn't have become a surgeon. I wouldn't have had the life I've had. I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have my grandson. Ethan paused. They saved my life by simply deciding I was worth saving. So when I see someone else in that position, someone who just needs one person to decide they're worth helping, I can't say no. I'm just paying forward what the Thompsons gave me. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then Sarah heard her close her clipboard. Thank you for sharing that, Mr. Brooks. I appreciate your honesty. They emerged from the room together. Margaret's expression was less skeptical now, though still professionally neutral. Miss Miller, I'll need to review your employment records, your financial plan for the next 6 months, and your long-term housing strategy. But based on what I've seen today and my conversation with Mr. Brooks, I'm satisfied that this is currently a stable, safe environment for Lily. Sarah's knees nearly gave out with relief. Really? You're satisfied? For now, yes. However, I'll be scheduling follow-up visits every 2 weeks for the next 3 months. And if anything changes in this arrangement, anything at all, you are legally required to notify me immediately. Do you understand? Yes. Absolutely, I understand. Good. Margaret gathered her things. I'll email you the schedule for the follow-up visits, and Miss Miller, I hope this works out for you. I genuinely do. As Margaret walked toward the front door, she paused and turned back to Ethan. Mr. Brooks, you should consider having a formal legal document drawn up outlining the terms of this living arrangement, just to protect everyone involved, including yourself. It would specify things like notice periods, financial responsibilities, and exit strategies should the arrangement need to end for any reason. That's good advice. I'll look into it. I'd recommend it. It protects both parties and makes everything clear. She nodded to both of them. I'll be in touch. When the door closed behind her, Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, her heart still racing. They'd made it through the first major test. Margaret was satisfied, at least for now. Then she looked at Ethan and saw how pale he'd gone, how his hand was pressed against his chest, his breathing shallow. The stress of the evaluation, the questions, the need to stay calm and in control, it had taken a toll. Are you okay? Sarah asked quietly. I'm fine. But his voice was tight. You're not. You're in pain. It's just stress. It'll pass. Sit down now. Sarah's voice left no room for argument. Ethan sat heavily on the couch. Sarah knelt beside him, taking his pulse. Fast, irregular, not good. Where's your medication? Kitchen. Top shelf, left side. Sarah retrieved it, along with water. She watched him take the pill, monitored his breathing, waited for his heart rate to slow back to something more normal. You shouldn't have had to go through that, she said quietly. Having your competence questioned like you're not capable of making your own decisions. She was doing her job. I understand that. It was still humiliating. Ethan managed a small smile. I've been through worse, and if answering a few questions helps keep Lily with you, it's worth any amount of humiliation. Sarah's eyes burned. You were in foster care. You never told me. It's not something I talk about often, but it's true. The Thompsons saved me, and I've spent my whole life trying to be worthy of that gift. You didn't have to tell Margaret that story. Yes, I did. She needed to understand this isn't about pity or naivety. It's about recognizing when you have the power to change someone's life, and choosing to use it. Sarah didn't trust herself to speak, so she just sat beside him until his breathing evened out, until the pain in his chest subsided, until he looked less like he might collapse. Thank you, she finally said, for everything, for this, for Lily, for not giving up on us. Thank you for making this house feel like a home again instead of a mausoleum. They sat in comfortable silence until they heard footsteps on the stairs. Noah and Lily appeared, both of them looking anxious. Did the lady leave? Lily asked quietly. She did, Sarah said. Everything's okay. Are we staying? Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms. We're staying, baby. We're staying. And for the first time since all of this began, Sarah let herself believe it might actually be true. Original audio by Shiny Stories. It was late, nearly 11 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday night. Noah and Lily were asleep upstairs. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, reviewing paperwork for the custody hearing that was scheduled for the following week. Forms and affidavits and character references, proof of employment, proof of income, proof that she was a fit mother despite everything that had happened. Ethan appeared in the doorway, moving slower than usual. He'd skipped his volunteer shift at the hospital today, claiming he was tired. Sarah had noticed but hadn't pushed. Everyone deserved rest. Can't sleep? She asked, looking up from her papers. Not tonight. He moved to the kettle, started making tea. How are you holding up? I'm terrified. Sarah admitted. What if the hearing doesn't go well? What if they decide this arrangement isn't stable enough? What if Sarah? Ethan's voice was gentle. You're spiraling. Take a breath. She did, forcing air into her tight lungs. I just keep thinking about all the ways this could fall apart. That's reasonable, but worrying about it won't change the outcome. You've done everything you can, have I? Sarah set down her pen. Sometimes I feel like I'm barely holding it together, like I'm one mistake away from losing everything. Ethan brought his tea to the table and sat down across from her. For a long moment, he was quiet, like he was weighing something important. Can I tell you something? He asked finally. Of course. I'm dying, Sarah. The words hung in the air between them. Sarah's brain processed them, rejected them, processed them again. What? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. The heart condition. It's not stable, it's progressive and it's getting worse. He met her eyes, his expression calm in a way that felt wrong, too accepting. I've known for several months. The cardiologist wants me to have surgery, a bypass, but at my age and with the extent of the damage, the risks are extremely high. Even if I survive the surgery, the recovery would be brutal and there's no guarantee it would give me more than a year or two. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Does Noah know? No, and I'd like to keep it that way for now. He's been through enough. I don't want him spending whatever time we have left watching me decline and waiting for me to die. Ethan, please, let me finish. He wrapped his hands around his teacup. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me or to make you think you owe me something. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth. When I offered you and Lily a place to stay, I did it knowing that I probably wouldn't be around to see how your story ends. Sarah's throat tightened. So you helped me because you're dying, like some kind of last good deed. No, I helped you because it was the right thing to do. But yes, knowing I had limited time made the decision easier, made it feel more urgent. He paused. I spent 30 years as a surgeon. I saved a lot of lives, but I also lost a lot of lives. And when Catherine died, I realized that all those successful surgeries, all those grateful patients, they didn't make me feel like I'd done enough. I wanted to do something that wasn't about medical expertise or technical skill. Something that was just about being human and choosing to help another human. Sarah didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that he'd be fine. But she was a nurse. She knew better than to make promises she couldn't keep. How long do you have? She asked quietly. I don't know. Months maybe. A year if I'm very lucky and very careful. And you spent that time helping me. Yes, and I don't regret it for a second. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. This changes everything. It doesn't have to. Of course it does. Margaret Collins asked you to verify that this was a stable arrangement. If you're she couldn't say the word. If your health is declining, she could argue that this isn't stable at all. Which is why we don't tell her. Which is why we keep things as normal as possible for as long as possible. That's not fair to you. You should be resting, taking care of yourself, not taking on the responsibility of housing a single mother and her child. Ethan's expression softened. Sarah, you're not a burden. You've given me something precious. You've given me a reason to get up in the morning. You've made this house feel alive again instead of like a tomb I'm waiting to die in. I haven't done anything. You've done everything. His voice was firm now. You make me eat properly.
You notice when I'm tired and insist I rest. You've turned this house back into a home. You've given me Noah's laughter again, because he's happier with Lily here. Those things matter, Sarah. They matter more than you know. Sarah wiped her eyes quickly. She wanted to fall apart, wanted to sob at the unfairness of it all. She'd finally found someone genuinely good, someone who helped without expecting anything in return, and he was dying. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice steady despite everything. "Nothing. Don't lie to me. Not now." Ethan smiled slightly. "Keep doing what you're doing. Keep making sure I eat my vegetables. Keep nagging me to rest when I look tired. Keep making this house feel like people actually live here instead of just exist. That's all I need. And when you get worse, when the condition progresses and you need more help, then we'll deal with it together. But Sarah, I need you to understand something. I'm not afraid of dying. I've made my peace with it. What I'm afraid of is dying alone in this house with nothing but regret and silence. You and Lily and Noah, you've given me something better than more time. You've given me a reason to value the time I have left." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. His skin was warm, his pulse steady beneath her fingers. Right now in this moment he was alive. That had to be enough. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said. "For trusting me with this. Thank you for not treating me like I'm already dead. For not making this into something morbid or sad." They sat in silence for a while, holding hands across the kitchen table. Two people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances and were holding on as tightly as they could. "I should get some sleep," Ethan said finally. "And so should you. That hearing isn't going to prepare itself." Sarah nodded, releasing his hand. "Will you take your medication before bed?" "Yes, nurse. And actually sleep instead of lying awake worrying." "I'll try. That's all I ask." As Ethan stood to leave, Sarah called after him. "Ethan." He turned. "I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I met you, and I'm glad you decided to help us instead of just waiting." "Me too, Sarah. Me too." He climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing for support. Sarah watched him go, her heart heavy with a truth she couldn't change. Then she went back to her paperwork, to preparing for a hearing that would determine her daughter's future, and tried not to think about the fact that the man who'd saved them both was running out of time. She couldn't save him, but she could make sure his remaining time wasn't spent alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The conference room in the Child Services building felt too small and too large at the same time. Too small for the weight of what was about to be decided. Too large for the handful of people gathered around the table. Sarah sat in a chair that felt like it was designed to be uncomfortable, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Ethan sat beside her, dressed in a suit that made him look distinguished and frail at the same time. Margaret Collins sat across from them with her files and notes. A family court evaluator named Mrs. Patterson sat at the head of the table, reviewing documents with a neutral expression that gave nothing away. Lily and Noah waited outside with a social worker. Sarah hated that they had to be here at all, that Lily would be called in to answer questions, that her 7-year-old daughter would have to explain to strangers whether she felt safe with her own mother. "Miss Miller," Mrs. Patterson began, looking up from her documents, "we're here today to determine whether full reunification is in Lily's best interest. I've reviewed the reports from Miss Collins, including the home visit evaluation. I have some questions before we proceed." Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. "Of course. You've been living with Mr. Brooks for approximately 3 weeks now. Is that correct?" "Yes. And prior to that you were experiencing housing instability."
"Yes. I lost my apartment due to a rent increase I couldn't afford." "You were living in your car for several days before this arrangement was made." Sarah's jaw tightened. The way Mrs. Patterson said it made it sound so much worse than it had been. "I was between residences, yes. I was sleeping in my car while I searched for affordable housing." "Can you explain how you plan to maintain stable housing moving forward, beyond this current arrangement with Mr. Brooks?" Sarah pulled out the folder she'd prepared. Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was steady. "I've been approved for a schedule adjustment at St. Anne Hospital. Starting next month I'll be working 3 12-hour shifts instead of 5 8-hour shifts. This will reduce my childcare needs, increase the time I can spend with Lily, and actually increase my hourly pay rate due to the shift differential. She slid documents across the table. I've also applied for the hospital's subsidized housing program for healthcare workers. According to the housing coordinator, an opening should be available within the next 2 to 3 months. In the meantime, Mr. Brooks has agreed to continue our current arrangement. Mrs. Patterson reviewed the documents carefully, and if the subsidized housing doesn't come through, if that timeline extends or the program doesn't have availability, then I'll pursue other options. I've already started saving for a security deposit on a market-rate apartment, but the subsidized housing is my primary plan. Mr. Brooks. Mrs. Patterson turned to Ethan. Can you confirm that you're comfortable with this arrangement continuing for an indeterminate period? Absolutely, Ethan said without hesitation. Sarah and Lily are welcome in my home for as long as they need. And you understand that Miss Miller is not obligated to provide you with any form of care, compensation or services in exchange for this housing. I do understand that. And she doesn't. We share a home as housemates. That's all. Mrs. Patterson made notes. I'd like to speak with Lily now. Miss Miller, you'll need to wait outside during this portion. Sarah's heart sank, but she nodded. She stood on shaking legs and walked to the door, glancing back once at Ethan, who gave her an encouraging nod. In the hallway she paced. The social worker sat with Noah on a bench, both of them silent. Sarah couldn't sit, couldn't stay still. Everything hinged on what happened in that room, on what Lily said, on whether her daughter could convince these strangers that she belonged with her mother. After what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, the door opened. The social worker brought Lily in. She looked impossibly small walking into that conference room, her feet barely making sound on the floor. Sarah couldn't hear what was being said. She pressed her ear to the door, but the voices were muffled, indistinct. Then finally the door opened again. Lily came out, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She didn't look at Sarah as the social worker led her back to the bench. Sarah was called back in. The expressions around the table were unreadable. Miss Miller, Mrs. Patterson said carefully, I've spoken with Lily about her current living situation and her feelings about reunification. Sarah held her breath. She reports feeling physically safe in Mr. Brooks' home. She has her own space, adequate food, and her basic needs are being met. Relief started to flood through Sarah, but Mrs. Patterson wasn't finished. However, I have some concerns about the emotional bond between you and your daughter. When I asked Lily if she felt comfortable living with you, her response was hesitant. When I asked if she calls you Mom, she said she usually just calls you Sarah. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah's chest tightened. Margaret spoke up. This suggests that the separation has caused significant attachment issues. The bond between mother and child has been disrupted, and it's unclear whether simple reunification will repair that damage. That's exactly why they need to be reunited, Ethan said, his voice firm. The longer Lily is separated from her mother, the worse those trust issues will become. Children don't stop loving their parents because of forced separation. They just stop believing the parents will come back for them. Or Margaret countered, reuniting them prematurely in an unstable situation could cause additional trauma if the living arrangement fails and Lily experiences another separation. The living situation is stable, is it, Mr. Brooks? Margaret opened another file. Because I've reviewed your medical records as part of this evaluation, and I have significant concerns. Sarah's blood went cold. You have a serious cardiac condition. Margaret continued. Your physician has recommended surgery that you've declined. Your prognosis without medical intervention is poor. How can you guarantee stability for Miss Miller and her daughter when your own health is uncertain and declining? Ethan's face remained calm, but Sarah saw his hand tighten on the armrest. I can't guarantee anything. No one can. But I can promise that while I'm here, while I'm able, they have a safe place to live. And when you're not here, when your condition worsens as your doctors have indicated it will, what happens to them then? Sarah found her voice. Then I'll handle it. I'm not depending entirely on Mr. Brooks for my long-term stability. I'm using this time to get back on my feet financially and secure permanent housing. By the time Mr. Brooks' health declines to the point where he can't maintain the household, I'll be in my own place with my daughter. Can you guarantee that, Miss Miller? No. but I can guarantee that I'll fight for it with everything I have. And fighting now is more than I could do 3 weeks ago when I was sleeping in my car and about to lose my daughter forever." Mrs. Patterson reviewed her notes, her expression still neutral. "Based on Lily's statements and the uncertainty surrounding Mr. Brooks' health, I'm concerned about long-term stability. However, I'm also cognizant of the fact that the current situation is significantly better than what preceded it." She looked directly at Sarah. "I'm recommending conditional reunification. You'll regain full custody of Lily, effective immediately. However, there will be mandatory check-ins with child services every 2 weeks for the next 6 months. Additionally, if Mr. Brooks' health deteriorates to the point where he can no longer provide housing, you must notify us within 72 hours and provide an alternative housing plan." Sarah's throat tightened. It wasn't perfect, but it was yes. "I understand. Thank you. There's one more matter we need to address." Margaret looked at Ethan. "Noah." Ethan's expression sharpened. "What about Noah? Given your declining health and uncertain prognosis, we need to consider whether Noah should be placed with a different family member or in foster care to ensure his long-term stability." "No." Ethan's voice was hard. "Absolutely. Absolutely not. Noah is my grandson. I'm his legal guardian. I'm perfectly capable of caring for him. For how long, Mr. Brooks? Your medical records indicate." "I don't care what my medical records indicate. Noah has already lost his father. He's dealing with his mother's ongoing health issues. I'm the only stable presence in his life, and I will not allow him to be removed from my care, based on speculation about my future health. We're trying to prevent Noah from experiencing another traumatic loss, by preemptively traumatizing him, by removing him from the only family he has left." The tension in the room was suffocating. Sarah wanted to say something, but this wasn't her fight. This was between Ethan and the system that was trying to protect Noah by destroying the one safe thing he had. Then the door opened. Noah stood in the doorway. The social worker tried to usher him back out, but Noah shook her off with a determination that surprised everyone. "Can I say something?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Mrs. Patterson looked startled. "Noah, this is a private meeting. It's about me, so I should get to say something." A pause. Then Mrs. Patterson nodded. "All right, come in." Noah walked to the center of the room. He didn't sit. He stood there, small and serious, looking at the adults who thought they knew what was best for him. "I know you think my grandpa's dying," Noah said. His voice didn't shake. "I know you think I should go live with some other family who's healthier and more stable and won't leave me alone when he dies. Noah, we're trying to protect you." Margaret began. "Let me finish." Noah's eyes were fierce. "My dad died 2 years ago in a car accident. My mom's been in and out of hospitals with her own health problems. I've lived with my grandpa since then, and he's the only person who's never lied to me. He's never pretended everything's okay when it's not. He's never promised me things would get better when he didn't know if they would." Mrs. Patterson started to speak, but Noah continued. "You think Miss Miller is using him. You think she's taking advantage of an old man to get a place to live, but you're wrong." His hands were clenched at his sides now. "She makes him eat vegetables every single day. She makes him rest when he's tired. She asks him how he's feeling every morning and every night. She notices when he's in pain before he says anything. Nobody else does that. Not his doctors, not his friends, not even me, and I live here." Sarah's eyes burned with tears, and Lily, Noah's voice grew stronger. "She's scared all the time. She's scared of being moved again. She's scared her mom's going to disappear, but that's not Miss Miller's fault. That's your fault. You're the ones who took her away. You're the ones making her think her mom's going to abandon her." "Noah, we're trying to ensure everyone's safety." Mrs. Patterson tried again. "You're trying to protect everyone by separating them, but that's not protection. That's just more loss." Noah looked at his grandfather, then at Sarah. "This house isn't perfect. We're not a perfect family, but we're trying. We're actually trying, and nobody's using anybody. We're just trying not to be alone anymore." The room fell silent. Ethan stood cross to Noah, and pulled him into a tight hug. The boy buried his face in his grandfather's shoulder, his whole body shaking with emotions he'd been holding back for far too long. Mrs. Patterson and Margaret whispered to each other, their heads bent together over documents. Sarah sat frozen, her heart breaking and mending at the same time. watching this brave child fight for his family, the only way he knew how. Finally, after what felt like forever, Mrs. Patterson spoke. Based on Noah's statement, the evidence provided, and the clear bond between all parties involved, I'm approving full reunification between Miss Miller and Lily, effective immediately. Check-ins will continue as previously stated. She looked at Ethan. And Miss Brooks, Noah will remain in your custody. We'll schedule wellness checks every month to monitor the situation, but unless there's a significant change in circumstances, no further action will be taken regarding Noah's placement. Sarah couldn't breathe. Thank you. Thank you so much. Margaret's expression was still skeptical, but she nodded. Don't make me regret this decision, Miss Miller. I won't, I promise. As they left the building, Lily walked beside Sarah but didn't take her hand. Her small fingers stayed curled at her sides, still not quite trusting that this was real. Noah walked beside Ethan, his eyes still red, but his shoulders straighter, like he'd won something important. They weren't fixed, they weren't whole, the bonds were still fragile, still healing, but they were together, and for now that was enough. 2 weeks after the hearing, everything changed. It was a Tuesday evening. Sarah had just gotten home from her shift, exhausted but content. The house smelled like the soup Ethan had been making for dinner. Noah and Lily were doing homework at the kitchen table, existing in comfortable silence, like they'd started to do. Then Sarah heard a crash from upstairs. She ran, took the stairs 2 at a time, found Ethan collapsed on the bathroom floor, his face gray, his hand pressed to his chest. Call 911, she shouted to Noah, already kneeling beside Ethan, checking his pulse. Weak, irregular. His breathing was shallow and labored. Ethan, stay with me, look at me. His eyes fluttered open. Sarah, he managed. I'm sorry. Don't talk, just breathe. Help is coming. The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes. Sarah rode with him, holding his hand while the paramedics worked. She called Noah from the ambulance, told him to stay with Lily, that Mrs. Patterson next door would come sit with them. They took Ethan to St. Anne, the same hospital where they'd met, the same halls Sarah had walked 1,000 times in her scrubs. But this time, she was on the other side. This time, she was the one sitting in the waiting room, terrified. A doctor she didn't recognize came out after an hour. Young, probably a resident. Are you family? Yes. Sarah lied without hesitation. What's happening? His heart is failing. The damage is extensive. We can do an emergency bypass surgery, but I need to be honest with you. Given his age and the severity of the cardiac damage, his chances of surviving the surgery are less than 30%. And even if he survives the operation, the recovery will be extremely difficult, and there's no guarantee of long-term success. Sarah's stomach dropped. What does he want? The resident looked uncomfortable. He's refusing the surgery. What? Why? He says he doesn't want to be a burden. He says he's made his peace with dying. Take me to him. Sarah pushed past the doctor into Ethan's room. He lay in the hospital bed, pale and hooked up to machines, but his eyes were clear and calm. Sarah, he said softly, you shouldn't be here. You should be with Lily and Noah. Noah's with Lily. Mrs. Patterson is staying with them. She pulled a chair to his bedside. They said you're refusing surgery. I am. Why? Because even if I survive the operation, which is unlikely, the recovery will be long and painful and expensive. I'll need round-the-clock care for months. I'll be a burden to you and Noah, and I won't do that. I won't spend my last months being a burden. That's not your decision to make alone. It's exactly my decision. It's my life. Sarah wanted to scream at him, wanted to shake him, wanted to tell him he was being selfish and stupid, but she'd been a nurse too long. She'd seen too many patients refuse treatment. She understood. Are you doing this because you're afraid of being a burden? She asked quietly. Or are you doing this because you're ready to go? Ethan was quiet for a long time. The machines beeped around them. Somewhere down the hall, a child was crying. I don't know, he admitted. Finally. Maybe both. Then figure it out. Because if you're refusing surgery just to make things easier for me, if you're dying because you think you'll inconvenience me, I'll never forgive you. Do you understand? Never. Sarah, I mean it. You gave me my daughter back. You gave me a home. You gave me hope when I had absolutely nothing. If you die because you're trying to protect me from the inconvenience of taking care of you while you recover, I will be so angry I won't be able to function. Ethan's eyes glistened.
I don't want to be a burden to anyone. You're not a burden, you never have been. You never could be. Sarah took his hand. But if you're ready to go, if you're tired and you've had enough, if you've made genuine peace with dying, then that's different. That I'll respect. I won't like it, but I'll respect your right to make that choice. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. I am tired, Sarah. I'm so very tired. I know, but I'm not ready. Not yet. I want to see Noah graduate from middle school. I want to see Lily call you mom again. I want to see you get into that subsidized housing and build a real life for yourself. Then fight, have the surgery. Let me take care of you during recovery. Let Noah and Lily and me give back even a fraction of what you gave us. Ethan shook his head slowly. I didn't give you anything expecting repayment. I know, but we're giving it anyway. That's how this works. He smiled faintly. You're as stubborn as I am. I learned from the best. Ethan closed his eyes. If I have the surgery, and I don't make it through, then you don't make it. But at least you tried. At least you gave yourself a chance. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand. All right, tell them I'll do the surgery. Sarah felt relief flood through her. I will, right now. But she never got the chance. 3 hours later, before they could even prep him for surgery, Ethan's heart gave out. Sarah was there. She held his hand as the monitors flatlined, as the doctors called the code, as they worked to bring him back. She held his hand as they finally stopped, as someone noted the time of death, as the machines went silent, and then she sat alone in the room with his body, trying to remember how to breathe. A nurse she vaguely knew from working at St. Anne came in quietly. I'm so sorry for your loss. We'll give you some time alone with him. His personal effects are here. She handed Sarah a plastic bag. Among the wallet and keys and phone was a sealed envelope with Sarah's name written on it in Ethan's careful handwriting. Sarah opened it with shaking hands. Sarah, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. I'm sorry I left you and Noah and Lily to figure everything out on your own. But I'm not sorry I met you. I'm not sorry I helped you. I'm not sorry for any of it. There are some things you need to know. I've already spoken with my lawyer, and everything is arranged. The house is yours. The deed has been transferred to your name. You and Lily have a permanent home now. No landlord, no rent, no one can take it away from you. There's also a trust fund for Noah's education. Enough to get him through college and graduate school if he wants. My lawyer will contact you with all the details. You need to know something else. Something I should have told you from the beginning. I didn't help you out of pity or obligation. I helped you because I understood exactly what it felt like to need someone and have no one show up. When I was 9 years old, my parents died in a car accident. I went into foster care. I was moved from home to home, unwanted, forgotten. Just another broken kid in an overwhelmed system. Until the Thompsons, George and Ellen Thompson, they were older, couldn't have children of their own, and they had absolutely no reason to take in a traumatized 9-year-old boy. But they did anyway. They gave me everything. A home, an education, a chance at a real life. They never asked for anything in return. They just loved me because I needed to be loved. I became a doctor because of them. I saved lives because of them. I built a family because of them. Everything good in my life traces back to the moment they decided I was worth saving. And when Catherine died, I forgot all of that. I forgot what it meant to give without expecting anything back. I forgot what it felt like to matter, to be useful, to make a difference in someone's life. You reminded me, Sarah. You and Lily, you didn't just take from me. You gave me so much more than you realize. You gave me purpose when I had none. You gave me a reason to get up every morning. You made this house feel alive again instead of like a tomb I was waiting to die in. You made me feel human again, useful, needed, not as a doctor or a surgeon, but as just a person who could help another person. The house is yours because you've already made it a home. The trust is for Noah because he deserves a future that isn't limited by my death. And this letter is for you because you need to know that you didn't use me. You saved me. You gave me the last good months of my life. You gave me back my sense of purpose. You reminded me why the Thompsons' gift mattered so much, and you gave me the chance to pass it forward. Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for helping me in return. Thank you for treating me like a person instead of an obligation. Thank you for making an old man feel useful one last time. Take care of Noah. Take care of Lily. Take care of yourself. And remember, kindness isn't a debt. It's a gift that keeps giving, long after the giver is gone. With all my gratitude, Ethan. Sarah read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, held it against her chest, and finally let herself cry. The community room at St. Anne Hospital was packed. Sarah stood at the front, looking out at the sea of faces: nurses, social workers, hospital administrators, families. Some she recognized from her shifts in the ER. Others were strangers who'd heard about the new program and wanted to learn more. A year ago, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the emotions churning in her chest. I was homeless. I was working myself into the ground trying to keep my daughter, and I was failing. The system was about to take her away permanently, and I had no idea how to stop it. She paused, letting the room settle into silence. Then I met Ethan Brooks. He was a retired cardiac surgeon, a hospital volunteer, and a complete stranger. He had absolutely no reason to help me, but he did anyway. He offered me and my daughter a place to live. He gave us stability when we had none. He gave us hope when we'd lost all of it. Sarah gestured to the display board behind her, where photos and program details were arranged. Today, I'm announcing a new initiative through St. Anne Hospital. It's called the Stable Ground Program. It's designed to provide temporary housing assistance to single parents working in healthcare who are at risk of losing custody of their children due to housing instability. Murmurs of interest rippled through the crowd. This program will partner with community members who have spare rooms or secondary properties. We'll provide legal support, case management, financial assistance for hosts, and a clear pathway to permanent housing for families. It won't solve everything, but it will give people a chance. The same chance Ethan gave me. She didn't name the program after him. He wouldn't have wanted that, but everyone in the room who'd known Ethan understood exactly where the idea came from. After the presentation, after answering questions and shaking hands and accepting congratulations, Sarah found Noah waiting outside in the hallway. He was taller now, his face less hollow. He volunteered at the hospital every Tuesday and Thursday just like his grandfather had done, sitting with elderly patients who had no family, reading to them, listening to their stories. He'd be proud of you, Noah said quietly. He'd be proud of you too. They walked to the parking lot together, comfortable in the silence that had formed between them over the past year. Not family by blood, but family nonetheless. Lily was waiting in the car, doing homework in the back seat. When Sarah opened the door, she looked up and smiled. A real smile. How'd it go, Mom? Mom, not Sarah, not Miss Miller, Mom. It had taken 8 months for Lily to call her that again. 8 months of patience and consistency, and proving over and over that Sarah wasn't going anywhere. But eventually the trust had rebuilt, slowly, carefully, one day at a time. It went really well, baby. As Sarah drove home, to the house that was now legally hers, the house where Ethan had lived and died, she thought about everything that had happened. About kindness and sacrifice, about the way one person's decision to help could ripple outward, touching lives they'd never meet. Ethan had saved her, but more than that, he taught her how to save others, how to see people who were struggling and offer help without making them feel small, how to give without keeping score, how to make someone feel human instead of like a burden. The Stable Ground program had already helped 3 families in its first 6 months, 3 mothers who'd been on the edge of losing their children, 3 families who now had a chance, and it would help more, dozens more, hundreds, eventually, because that's what kindness did. It didn't end when the giver died. It lived on, passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, generation to generation. Ethan had received kindness from the Thompsons. He'd passed it to Sarah. And now Sarah was passing it forward to others who desperately needed it. An unbroken chain of human decency stretching across years and lives and circumstances. And the beautiful thing about it, the thing that made Sarah's chest ache with bittersweet joy, was that it never asked for anything in return. It just existed, pure and simple and absolutely transformative. One person helping another, not for recognition, not for reward, just because they could, just because it was right. Thanks for listening on the official Shiny Stories channel.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.